I don't have a...
Let's answer some of your questions about the coronavirus pandemic. Joining us tonight, Dr. Manny Alvarez, Fox News Channel's Senior Managing Editor for Health News. Dr. Manny, thanks for being here. I want to start with one of our questions that came in from Bradley Reed. This is about hydroxychloroquine. Take a listen.
Hey, Brett. I was wanting to ask about hydrochloroquine. I see it's getting a lot of good results when it's being administered to patients with COVID-19. Why is it not being encouraged to prescribe this to patients who are going to die?
So, Dr. Manny, I guess that is a big question. We've heard what Dr. Fauci has said. What is the real back and forth on this potential treatment?
Well, look, I don't think there's a lot of back and forth. I mean, right now it's being utilized widespread through the clinical world. I'm using it. Many hospitals are using it. And we're learning a lot. This is a drug that basically interferes with the duplication of the virus. So it's not going to kill the virus. It's going to minimize the latency period of the viremia and therefore hopefully get you sooner out of it. So that's good. The other antibiotic, the Z-Pak, is basically a good antibiotic. It kills a lot of bacteria in the lungs, which is the primary organ that this coronavirus affects, but it's also an anti-inflammatory because it really minimizes a lot of inflammation in the lungs. So it's a good combination. Now, what are we learning? We're learning that it's good to give it in patients in the early phase of the disease, because once you're in the ICU, you have to go to other medications. There's a whole different kinds of antivirals and things that we have to give. But it is being utilized widespread in the country and in many settings. I don't think you're getting there's no negative pushback from the medical community that sees patients in hospitals or sees patients in clinics right now. So I think it's being utilized.
Paint the picture, Dr. Manny, about how we as a country start to work again. What does that look like? Short of a vaccine, which is a year to 18 months really away, paint the picture of how that looks.
Well, I think the picture is going to be a similar picture of what a lot of folks have talked about. I think that you're going to continue to isolate the risk individuals. You're going to isolate the elderly, the people with chronic underlying medical conditions that are severe. You're going to still sequester those. But for the folks that have recovered, once we start doing antibody testing, which is really around the corner, antibody testing, it's not a test that has to be invented. It just has to be mass produced. That's the big difference. Once you start seeing that individuals have had that have antibodies, that's protective, and therefore the likelihood of you getting a recurrence, unless there's something else that comes from left field, is real, and therefore you're going to be able to incorporate yourself back to the workplace. So you're going to see that type of momentum from the medical community in conjunction with whatever planning the politicians decide to do vis-a-vis they talked about restaurants, 50% occupancy, and smaller venues and things like that. But the big picture, I think, that is once you have this autoimmunity that you're going to be seeing, then you're going to be able to aggregate people and get them back to work.
We have a lot of questions from people who wonder whether we went too far as a country, whether this was the only thing that we could have done. That is also obviously having a massive impact on the economy. Dr. Manny, here's a question from David on Twitter. If 70% of the deaths are over 60, wouldn't issuing stay-at-home orders for those 60 and over, many of whom are retired and out of the workforce, minimize economic damage while also minimizing the strain on hospitals?
Good question, but remember, every infectious disease has a vector. And it's just so happened that coronavirus vector is us. So, the way that a virus transmits itself from human to human, you have to have human contact. And whether you sequester older people or people with underlying medical disease and let everybody else go and do whatever they were doing, you're going to have those vectors come in and out and reinfect infect those people. And of course, you're going to have tremendous mortality. Remember, people complain about why did we take this drastic measure? America, 1/3 of America is not healthy. It's overweight, it's hypertensive, it's diabetic, It has cardiac disease. You know, we're not talking about 300 million people that are fit. We're talking about 300 million people where 1/3 has underlying chronic medical conditions, and therefore you had to take these drastic measures.
Okay, last question. This is from Captain Roger about the listing of fatalities, morbidity. Take a listen.
I'm curious how many of the people who died in the United States had a comorbidity indicated in their death. I mean, are these mostly people who were already dying and COVID pushed them over the edge? Or were they healthy people who were dying? Thanks.
There's a story in the Washington Post and New York Times about possibly underreporting of those deaths. But there's the flip side, in that, you know, people may have been not healthy and this kind of pushed them over the edge. Will we know ever how it is?
Oh, absolutely. Look, this is a granular data that keeps changing every day. The numbers keep adding up. We just had 700 people die in New York City in a cluster type of, statistic. All these numbers are going to be analyzed, in a few months or in a year, and you're going to see in a very clear picture that the vast majority had underlying medical conditions. You know, whether they were young or old, by the way. You know, some of the people that have died in their 40s and 50s had underlying medical conditions like high blood pressure and things like that. So that's true. You're going to find a cluster of people that did not have underlying medical conditions but just reacted very aggressively. Because remember, when you get this aggressive pulmonary issue that you see with coronavirus, it's almost like an allergic reaction, right? It's almost like a shock. Your body overreacts and creates this storm of inflammatory mediators that really interferes with your oxygenation. So some people are very prone to that, and that could be genetically derived. And we'll see that data very clearly and very granular in another few months when the numbers settle down and you are able to do the quantification.
Dr. Manny, as always, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brett.